Today we have a pharmacist with us, and one of the reasons why I chose to get Mr. Calvin Freedman, who is here, to speak to us, because he has a compounding pharmacy. Now, some people wonder what a compounding pharmacy is, and I'm not going to tell you. He will. He'll tell you all about it, what's good about it, what's bad about it, and maybe even if you're good people, he will give you a little insight as to why the people became so violently ill in New England as a result of injections of drugs which came from a compounding pharmacy. He's got all the inside dope on all this good stuff. Anyway, we're certainly glad to have you here, and I will tell you that Mr. Freeman initially graduated from the Temple School of Pharmacy and got his degree in pharmacy. He has obtained many certificates in women's health, cancer, and well, a whole lot of related subjects. Has been very active both in the state and local pharmaceutical societies, having been president of the Delaware State Board of Pharmacy for 3 to 4 years, and is now a member. Is also a member of the Delaware Pharmaceutical Society. These people, he has names. Anyway, he is also involved, and don't you dare jump on this one because I hope nobody will. He is also the president of the American Veterinary Pharmaceutical Society.
The American College of Veterinary Pharmacy.
American College of Veterinary Pharmacy. He's correcting me as well. He should, because he knows it. I don't. He has also been very active statewide in the Medicaid pharmaceuticals, and has been there for a number of years. So we have a gentleman here who is active in his own right in the pharmaceutical industry and the compounding pharmacy industry, as well as statewide as far as giving of his time and efforts for the pharmaceutical industry statewide. So if you will, please welcome Mr. Cal Freedman.
Thank you, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah. Oops, I'm so sorry.
Louder? Is this a volume control? Let's try this. Is that any better? Okay. So, I'm a pharmacist. I have been for quite some time. My graduating class celebrated its 50th reunion 3 years ago. So, I guess my first question is, does everyone here know what a compounding pharmacy is? Everybody heard of a compounding pharmacy or know what it is? Okay, so basically a compounding pharmacy is a pharmacy that makes medicine from scratch. All right, we start out with the raw ingredients and make medicines that are not commercially available. So there are a number of different kinds of definitions of what compounding is. So this one comes from the United States Pharmacopoeia, which is the official compendium of the United States and recognized worldwide as the eminent authority on medications and drugs. So it says the preparation, mixing, assembling, altering, packaging, and labeling of a drug delivery device or device in accordance with a licensed practitioner's prescription, medication order, or initiative based on the practitioner-patient-pharmacist compounder relationship in the course of professional practice. Now that sounds like it's kind of like an overreach, but it really is exactly what it is. So what a compounding pharmacy is basically a retail pharmacy that fills prescriptions that are not available commercially from other establishments. So it's kind of a unique kind of a business. So compounding is any manipulation of a drug or drug product outside of its official labeling. So the official labeling is designated by the Food and Drug Administration. When a drug company applies to the FDA for approval of a drug, it has to go through efficacy studies and safety studies. So any manipulation of that drug or drug product outside of its official labeling is compounding. So when you go into the hospital and you get an IV admixture, okay, that's compounding. That's off-label use of an FDA-approved drug. And that admixture then no longer is an FDA-approved drug. So it differs from manufacturing in the presence of a patient-physician-pharmacist relationship. So typically there has to be a relationship between the three. Drug manufacturing, there's no patient involved. It's a commercial thing to try to sell so that their products will be used. So let's go back to the history of compounding. Compounding is the history of pharmacy. Before the 1900s or early in the 1900s, when before drug manufacturers came into being, every prescription that was filled had to be made from scratch or compounded. So there was no terminology that said compounding. As the drug manufacturers became more and more prevalent, then compounding sort of became an art and science, and that's what we call it. It's the art and science of creating a customized dosage form based on an RX or order of a licensed healthcare practitioner. And as you may know, recently the ability to prescribe has been extended to nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, optometrists in the course of their business, et cetera, et cetera. So even there's some naturopathic physicians now have the ability to prescribe. So in the past, as I say, compounding was pharmacy, and the 1900s gave way to commercially prepared pharmaceuticals. So there were many strengths and dosage forms available. Economics changed all that. What happened was the FDA would approve a couple dosage strengths, and that was all there was. So basically a 100-pound female would get the same maximum dose as a 250-pound male. Let me tell you a little bit about my practice, and I don't want this to be a commercial for my practice, but we do it right. About 60% of my practice is veterinary medicine. And one of the things that strikes me a difference between veterinary medicine and human medication is in veterinary medication, everything is milligrams per kilogram. The dose is dependent on the size of the animal, because you can have a 3-pound Chihuahua and a 250-pound Mastiff, and you can't give them the same medications. Not so in human medications. You get a prescription for penicillin, you're going to get the maximum dose whether you weigh 120 pounds or 300 pounds. So the limited in strengths and dosage form, and we like to say that's one-size-fits-all approach. So according to the NCPA, the National Community Pharmacists Association, in a poll, more than 70% of pharmacists report they do some compounding. Virtually all hospitals do compounding. As I indicated, the IV admixtures and all those kind of things are considered compounding. Approximately 10% of all prescriptions and medication orders are compounded. It's now become a $22 to $25 billion a year industry. When I say that 70% of pharmacists report that they do compounding, that doesn't really mean they know how to compound. There are a number of different kinds of compounding. So they'll say they compound if they mix 2 ointments together. And yes, that is compounding. The colleges and universities today, in the colleges of pharmacy, do not teach compounding. There's a very small class that involves compounding, how to make capsules, so they don't learn the chemistry of compounding. They don't learn the pH. They don't learn isotonicity of ophthalmics. So it's going from a curriculum of chemistry and pharmacy and medications to a clinical courses. So my pharmacy takes in students. We typically have anywhere from 1 to 4 students at all times from colleges and universities in the greater Northeast. We've had one student away from Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. So we get students from all over who going to go back to the roots of compounding. And they come in for 4 or 5 week rotations. The last week of a pharmacy student's curriculum, by the way, in order to become a pharmacist, the entry-level pharmacist is now 6 years of college with a doctorate of pharmacy at the end of the curriculum. So on the last year, the 6th year, the students go out on pharmacy rotations to various things. There are those that are mandated, so you have to go on a retail rotation, you have to go on a hospital rotation, you have to go on an ambulatory care rotation. Then there are a number of them that are also, they can choose to take them. And in this case, a lot of them choose compounding pharmacy. The colleges and universities are hard-pressed to find enough compounding pharmacies, thank you, to actually have facilities for everybody that wants to go into the compounding. So we're more than welcome to take them, and as you'll see later on, have a few slides of what my compounding lab looks like. You'll see we have plenty of room to handle almost any eventuality. So what's the reasons for the growth of pharmacy compounding? Through the 1960s and 1970s, compounding fell out of favor. All drugs were basically manufactured. There were some practices of medicine that always use compounding. Dermatologists always have their famous formulas that they want made up so that they can get the best results. There were limited dosage forms. So there are a number of tablets and capsules that are available, but if there's a child that really needs a medication and it's not available, a compounding pharmacy can make it into a liquid or some other kind of medication, some other kind of dosage form to make it easier to use. There are limited strengths. As I indicated earlier, it's kind of like a one-size-fits-all. For instance, amoxicillin, which is a penicillin derivative, you get 250 milligrams or 500 milligrams. You have no other choice. And the FDA approval is for 250 milligrams as a maximum dose. So limited strengths. And again, there are some people that need actual more. Now, when you go to a hospital, things are different. You know, then you start getting into, when you get into the serious medications like the chemotherapeutic drugs, those are always based on either square meters of the surface, the body surface, or on weight. So home health care has also contributed to the growth of pharmacy compounding. So more and more people are going home and being treated at home by nurses or visiting nurses. So hospice care also, which sort of falls into home health care. Hospice patients don't always have the ability to swallow it at end of life. So compounding pharmacies can make medications in transdermals, and I'll get more into transdermals because the skin is a marvelous organ for the transport of medications into the human body. There are a number of non-available drug products or combinations. So a number of drugs have been discontinued over the years simply because it's not economically feasible for a drug manufacturer to continue to manufacture them. I can name you numerous compounds that have been withdrawn from the market by manufacturers, but there still is dramatic need for these compounds that are out there. One of which, for the physicians in the group, crash carts have to contain epinephrine preservative-free. It's not manufactured anymore. You have to have it, so it's not made, so compounding pharmacists can do it. Drug shortages. Right now there's a dramatic shortage of a tremendous number of drugs. The number is over 200 drugs, both tablets, capsules, and injectables, that are not available. And in these kind of situations, although a compounding pharmacy cannot duplicate commercially available product, when it is not available, the Food and Drug Administration does allow us to compound them in short supply. And again, when I say compound, we start out from the raw ingredients. We're not crushing up tablets and capsules. We're actually buying the raw ingredients from the same distributors as the drug manufacturers are buying them. So then there's orphan drugs. These are drugs that are used to treat medical conditions that are not profitable for drug manufacturers to do because there's not enough people. So there's an orphan drug status, and compounding pharmacies can take up that slack. Veterinary compounding is another tremendous big issue, and as I said, it's about 60% of my practice. Over the last 10 years, veterinary medicine has advanced to such a great degree that now when you go to the veterinarian, you're liable to be sent to a specialist. So there's a veterinary specialty center in Newcastle that has, and I know I'm shorting some, there's an ophthalmologist, there's an orthopedic surgeon, there's an internist, there's a dermatologist, there's an oncologist. So basically on any kind of medication treatment you want, you're liable to be, and a dentist, I forgot, veterinary dentist. So all these things are involved, and all of them need medications. The number of medications that are approved by the Food and Drug Administration for veterinary use is extremely limited. So most of the drugs that we compound are what are considered off-label human use, and the FDA allows that to happen. So then there's new therapeutic approaches and special patient populations. And I'll get into the special patient populations a little bit later. People with celiac disease, people with mitochondrial defects, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll get into those things a little bit. So again, special patient populations, pediatrics is a big thing. A lot of the drugs that are used in oncology and cardiology are off-label use of adult drugs. So what happens when you have a child that's at DuPont Hospital for Children that develops cancer, and they don't have the medication available in a form that is amenable to a child, or the dose that's amenable. So they come to us for that kind of thing. And I'll get into, when I get into the specifics of pediatrics, I'll go over all the different dosage forms and the medications that we can do. Geriatrics is another thing. Sometimes as we grow older, we lose the ability to swallow medications, and again, the compounding pharmacist can take up that slack and prepare medications in either flavored liquids or actually in treat form, so it can be chocolate or peanut butter treat to take the medication. There's bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, which has become a very large part of our practice also. The Women's Health Initiative of a few years ago that was started out to prove how good synthetic hormones did in preventing heart attack and stroke and cancer turned bad. And those people that were on Prempro were told that you better stop it because you're putting yourself at risk. When that happened, and we have been doing this for years, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, which is actually taking the hormones that are exactly the same as in the human body and preparing them in dosage forms that were appropriate for women. And the studies that are now coming out are indicating that there is a safer way to do it. And again, I'll get into that a little bit later. Pain management is another big one. In pain management today, most of the time you're dealing with narcotics or some kind of way to alleviate the pain. We do it in a different way, and we'll get into that a little bit more deeply when I get to the specifics. Dental patients, pre-dental work, we can do anesthetics, environmental and cosmetic sensitive people who are allergic to preservatives or dyes in certain medications. We do a lot of sports injuries. University of Delaware uses us a lot for their athletes when they get sprains and strains, and again, I'll get into the medications and how we apply those. And again, veterinary compounding, and we do small animal, large animal, herds, exotics, and companions. So who regulates compounding pharmacy? There was a lot of hue and cry of who regulates compounding pharmacy. So compounding pharmacy is basically regulated by the individual state boards of pharmacy. It's been this way, and I'll go back over the history of how this came to be. And the state boards of pharmacy are mandated by the United States Pharmacopoeia. And the United States Pharmacopoeia, as I indicated, is the official compendium of the United States. And it's recognized worldwide as being the premier edition. It used to be, they call it the USPNF, which was a national formulary. There were two different publications. They've now merged. There's no more publications. Everything now is online. It's all electronic now. So you can't buy the USPNF. You have to buy a subscription to it so you can view it online. And the FDA mandated that all state boards of pharmacy comply with the United States Pharmacopoeia. So let's go back to the USP history. The USP history goes back to the 1820s when they were attempting to sort of make all drugs the same. Not make all drugs, but all drugs. If you said it was codeine, it had to be codeine. So they were trying to make it so that everything was able to be duplicated. So one pharmacy that was extracting codeine from a cocoa plant, okay, was going to come up with the same actual product. So in the old days, actually, pharmacies used to decoct or distill or actually extract the chemicals from their active ingredients. And the drugs used to come from plants, it used to come from animals, it come from minerals. So there was various ways to get these drugs. So the legal recognition starts next, and it's the requirements of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And it applies to drugs that are compounded and those that are manufactured. So the FDA actually has dramatic oversight over everything. So all of the drugs all of the ingredients that are used both in manufacturing and in compounding come through FDA inspected facilities. So you can't have some fly-by-night outfit in one of the third world nations that is supplying chemicals. It has to come through a severe inspection process by the Food and Drug Administration. So in 1848, there was a Drug Import Act that recognized USP standards. Now, you realize this is only like 20 years after the formation of the USP. And what was happening was the European companies that were manufacturing the drugs were dumping them in the U.S. In 1906, there was the Pure Food and Drug Act that enforced USP and NF standards. In 1938, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act recognized USP and NF standards. And it wasn't until 1938 that the FDA was actually became an organization that had teeth. And I'll review that and let you know why in a second. And in 1997, an act called FDAMA, or the FDA Modernization Act, states that compounding must comply with USP and NF standards and each chapter on pharmacy compounding. And the USP is not only compounding, the USP has monographs on basically every drug that's used in the world, as well as how it's extracted, what the standard it has to conform to, et cetera, et cetera. So the FDA history, as I indicated, in 1937, 1938, there was a drug called sulfanilamide, which was the first sulfa drug. And it was absolutely an amazing drug. It was the first drug that they found to be effective against streptococcal infections. It had dramatic curative effects, and it was used safely for a number of years in both tablet and powder form. And a company in Tennessee called the S.E. Massengill Company, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Massengill. There's the big product that they came up with after this debacle was Massengill Douche. If anybody's familiar with it, that used to be a big product. And anyway, a chemist there developed a formula for pediatric use, and he called it sulfanilamide elixir. And it tasted good, and the kids would take it. Unfortunately, the solvent that he used to dissolve the sulfanilamide was diethylene glycol. For those of you who don't know what diethylene glycol is, it's antifreeze. And as a result of that, over 100 people died in the United States. And this was the initiative that the FDA needed. They've been trying to form an FDA to regulate drug manufacturers over the years. So the FDA was basically formed to oversee drug manufacturers in the United States. And imported drugs were not allowed. It disallowed you can't get a drug from Canada brought into this country. It has to be an FDA, our federal government approved drug. You can't get a drug that comes in from Russia or from China. It has to be a United States FDA approved drug. So that being said, and I know I may be developing a lot of questions in your minds, and I will hold the questions till the end, and so that we can have time for that. So the different categories of compounding. So we have non-sterile, and there's three categories of non-sterile compounding according to the USP. There's simple, moderate, and complex. So simple would be mixing Maalox with Benadryl together to get a liquid. So you're mixing two ingredients, or mixing two ointments together. So those are simple. Moderate is in complexity is if you have to weigh out one of the chemicals and dissolve it in something. Complex, it becomes more complex in the formation of it, so that you're doing multiple ingredients and you have to check the pH and isotonicity and those kind of things. So that's non-sterile. Those are things that don't have to be sterile. Sterile has three categories: low risk, medium risk, and high risk. All sterile compounding, according to the USP, must be done in a clean room now. You can't go into a regular pharmacy and say we're going to mix up an ophthalmic or an injectable unless they have a clean room that is dramatically inspected and overseen by state boards of pharmacy. So low risk is basically preparing a sterile to sterile mixture. So for instance, if I wanted to dilute insulin for a child, insulin comes in 100 units per ml. So if the dose is a half a unit, it's impossible to measure out accurately a half of a unit So we'll actually dilute sterile to sterile. There's nothing being exposed to the air. It's just closed systems. Medium risk is if you're mixing a number of sterile products together. High risk is basically starting out with a non-sterile product and finishing up with a sterile product. And there's various ways to sterilize a product. There's heat sterilization with an autoclave. There's heat sterilization with a convection oven, again, depending on the type of product it is. And then there's membrane filtration that actually sterilizes products also. So this is another definition of compounding. The preparation of a drug in accordance with a licensed practitioner's prescription or medication order based on the patient-prescriber-pharmacist relationship. And again, we say, why compound? And we're just reiterating all of the different ways and why we have to. One of the things I might not have mentioned before was allergen-free medication. So if somebody is allergic to an ophthalmic that has benzalkonium chloride in it or thiomerisol in it, then we can prepare it in an allergy-free medication. And I think I might have indicated all these. So USP standards, we rely on these quite heavily. I actually serve on the State Board Committee right now to rewrite the compounding regulations. Although our state regulations and state statutes require that we follow USP and NF standards, USP standards 795 and 797 are relatively new standards, and they're extremely complex. And a lot of these were brought on by the debacle that from some of the compounding, quote, I call them compounding pharmacies, but they really were not, that were introducing products into the industry and the medical complexes that were not up to snuff. And again, if you have any questions about that later on, I'll be happy to discuss that with you. So those two parts of the United States Pharmacopoeia became part of our state law. And if anybody doesn't know, there's statutes or laws and there's regulations. So the laws which are promulgated by the legislature, by the House and Senate, and the governor in the state, give regulatory authority to the board. So a statute will give regulatory authority to the State Board of Pharmacy to promulgate regulations to control things. So our regulations indicate that you have to follow USP standards. But when the new standards for 795 and 797 came out, it became kind of a gray area. Everybody was doing the same thing that they used to do. So they used to think if you had a laminar flow hood, which is kind of a part of a clean room, in a hallway someplace, that you were doing sterile compounding. It's not so anymore. With 797 standards, it became dramatically complex. So it becomes much more difficult to have a sterile lab. And I believe that my pharmacy is the only pharmacy in the state that has a clean room that is operating right now. Now, there are sterile clean rooms, obviously, in hospitals and infusion centers and things like that, but I believe I'm the only retail pharmacy that has a sterile suite that complies with federal and state laws. So these are the USP standards. The standards that are numbered, and you see those crazy little brackets, that's the USP terminology, so that they number these things. So under USP standards, anything that's numbered below 1,000 becomes a mandate for every state in the country. So when the numbers that used to be on 795 and 797 were above 1,000, so they were kind of like suggestions of good, as this was good practice. When the USP moved them below 1,000, they became mandates. Everybody had to follow those. The 1160, which is above, is a thing on pharmacy calculations, which become, and again, students today don't learn pharmacy calculations. They don't learn sodium chloride equivalents. They don't learn molecular weights. They have no idea what a CAS number is, a chemical abstract symbol, which is a universal number for a chemical. They have no idea what these things are. I'm always amazed when the students come in and they ask me, check the CAS number, and they say, what's a CAS number? Well, that's a number that's on every chemical, whether it be an excipient or whether it be an active drug, that is given to on an international basis. So if a chemical comes in from a foreign country, it has a CAS number, it has to comply with this USP standard. And quality assurance, of course, is still not mandated, but suggested in the U.S. drug preparations in the absence of stability information that is applicable to a specific drug or preparation. So what that means is, if you have a non-aqueous, so no water in the formulation, it's called anhydrous, the beyond use date is no later than the time remaining until the earliest expiration of any API. API stands for active pharmaceutical ingredient. So those are the actual ingredients in it, or 6 months, whichever is earlier. So these are non-aqueous, no water involved with it. If it's a water-containing oral formulation, it's 14 days when stored in a refrigerator. We refer to it as controlled cold temperatures, and there are USP standards with what's cold temperature, what's freezing. So if it's a water-containing topical, dermal, and mucosal, then your beyond use date is 30 days. Now again, this is in the absence of stability information. So there are a number of textbooks out there, a number of publications that actually have studies on drugs that show if you formulate it this way, using this excipient and this preservative, this becomes the beyond use state. So one of the drugs we use as an example in veterinary medicine, believe it or not, it's used for bladder cancer in dogs, is a drug called piroxicam. And piroxicam is nothing more than one of the older non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. They used to be called Feldine. Well, Feldine is gone now. Pfizer stopped manufacturing it. It's available generically. But someplace or other, they found out that it was good for bladder cancer. Matter of fact, the cure rate is absolutely amazing in bladder cancer in dogs using piroxicam. So a lot of times dogs can't take a pill, so we have to make it in a liquid. So if we make it in a solid dosage form, which is non-aqueous, we can give it a 6-month beyond use date. A lot of dogs in their conditions are not able to take a pill, so we have to make a water-containing oral formulation. Well, 14 days supply, having to come back to the pharmacy every 14 days can be onerous. So what we have done, we send out the medication, we prepare it, and we send it out to an independent laboratory. And we say, we want you to do a stability study on this over once a week for a month, and then once a month till we tell you to stop. And we now have the piroxicam oral formulations, the way that we make it, out to 6 months. So a client can get a medication for their animal with a 6-month beyond use date. So we have the ability, and believe it or not, I consider the laboratories that we do the testing with now as my partners, because that's how much money it costs. Every time they do that test, it rings a cash register, and it's not a cheap cash register to tell me that it's still potent after 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So it's ringing a cash register each time, but one has to do that. So the 797 requirements for beyond use dating are much more stringent. So again, I told you before there was low risk, medium risk, and high risk compounding. So in low risk, which is sterile to sterile, at controlled room temperature, it's 48 hours, refrigerated 14 days, frozen 45 days. And all of them frozen are 45 days. Medium risk, high risk, which is when you start out with something that was non-sterile and have to sterilize it, you only have 24 hours, 3 days refrigerated, 45 days. And again, this is in case you haven't performed beyond use stability studies on it. And one of the requirements of USP 797 is if you make a sterile product, you have to send it out for testing, both for sterility and for potency. So every time we if we get a unique product and a unique compound to do, we have to make it. We're allowed to, as long as we're not compounding more than 25 dispensing units, we have to send out for testing to make sure, number one, that our processes maintain sterility, and number two, maintain potency. So, and again, this is even more expensive to do, so we can get extended dating on it. And again, there are publications that have injectable medications. The American Society of Healthcare Pharmacists, which is basically the hospital pharmacists, have volumes after volumes of stability studies on medications that are made sterile. But it is extremely stringent, and you can't move from this without having further studies. And again, everything that we do gets sent out for further study. So to give you an idea, we said earlier that a lot of people are allergic to preservatives and medication. So one of the drugs that we've done stability studies on is dexamethasone ophthalmic solution. So those people that require dexamethasone post-cataract surgery or post-eye surgery, eye inflammations can have a tendency to be on it long term. So when we first started making it, we were down to 9 days. It's a medium risk of stability. So we actually started sending it away. And when you do sterility testing, it's not only sterility, it's potency, and it's endotoxins. So endotoxins are byproducts of bacteria and fungal that can remain in a product after sterilization, and you have to test for all 3 of those. So right now we're up to 6 months on our dexamethasone preservative-free ophthalmic solutions. So we can, with impunity now, this is refrigerated by the way, but now with impunity we have the studies that show that the way that we make our dexamethasone ophthalmic solution, and this is unique, not every pharmacy has this, and we've never published this, so nobody else can use our formulations the way that we make them. So those are the kind of things that you have to be involved with when you're doing sterile compounding. So the question comes, and one of the things that the Food and Drug Administration would like to see us use. Now, let's take a step back. Everybody likes to say compounded medications are not FDA approved. And that's true. But every compounded medication is never FDA approved. And the active ingredients in FDA approved medications are not FDA approved. What I mean by that, the FDA gives approval to a finished product in a specific dosage form, in a specific strength, okay? And it has to prove both safety and efficacy. It has to be indicate that it's safe under normal usage, and it has to prove that it's efficacious. It does what they're saying it's going to use. Any movement from that, and the chemical that's in it, the active drug that's in it, is not FDA approved. It's the finished product that's approved. So any manipulation of that particular chemical or finished product becomes a non-approved drug. So to say it's not FDA approved, when you go into the hospital again, every time you get an IV admixture, which is an IV bag that has another drug added to it, that's no longer FDA approved. It's off-label usage. It's standard procedure in every hospital. So none of those things are FDA approved. So the FDA would like to see us use commercial products, tablets and capsules, rather than the active pharmaceutical ingredient. And the question is, why don't we like to do that? Well, the FDA puts standards on potency of every one of the finished products. Every one of the FDA-approved products has a standard. And typically, the minimum standard is plus or minus 10% ingredients. So, and in some cases, it's plus or minus 20%. So when you get a tablet or a capsule manufactured by a drug company, if it's a 100 milligram tablet, okay, it can either 90 milligrams or 110 milligrams. Okay? You never know what it is. There's no publication. They don't have to tell you what's in that tablet. And again, in some medications, it can be anywhere from 80 milligrams to 120 milligrams. So when we compound that, we're held to the same standard. We can be plus or minus 10%. Okay? But if I'm starting out with something that is 90%, okay, and I'm allowed to have a 10% variance, I can't be assured that my finished product is going to be within that plus or minus 10%. And what's even worse, and that may be subtherapeutic, what's even worse, if there's 110 milligrams in that product and I'm over by 10%, I'm running the risk of having a severe problem with that. So for that reason, we like to use the active pharmaceutical ingredient. When I weigh out a gram, I know it's a gram. The digital scales that we use are accurate, they're calibrated, they are checked and double checked, they're accurate to, and I don't have any pictures of the digital scales that we use, but most of the scales we have are sensitive to 1 milligram. And if any of those that don't know what's in a milligram, there's 454 milligrams in a gram. So it's kind of, there's 1,000 milligrams in a gram, 454 grams in a pound. So you can imagine how tiny an amount that is. We have a scale that's sensitive to 1/10 of a milligram, and we have an analytical scale that's sensitive to 1/100 of a milligram. And that you can barely see that amount. So when we weigh an amount, not only do we weigh that amount, we actually print what was weighed, okay, so we can check to make sure that the amount weighed was correct. So we're assured every time that when we weigh out an ingredient, it's exactly what's supposed to be in that medication. An interesting point is 80% of the raw ingredients that are in our manufactured tablets and capsules in this country come from foreign sources. So what happens is if a drug manufacturer comes up with an FDA-approved product, and again, it's a product, a finished product that has a specific strength, a specific dosage form. Once they've developed that and get FDA approval, they farm out the manufacture of that raw ingredient to a foreign country, and then it gets imported. And the foreign countries, the facilities that are manufacturing them are FDA inspected. It comes in here, and then they have to go through a testing process to get a certificate of abidance, so that every chemical that comes in has a C of A. So you know that every chemical coming in complies with USP standards or another official compendium. USP is not the only official compendium. There's a British pharmacopoeia. There's a few other pharmacopoeias across the world, and not every drug is in the USP. So somewhere in the British pharmacopoeia, not in others. There are a lot of drugs in the UK and other countries that are not approved for use in this country. But 80% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients in manufactured products come from foreign sources, which is an interesting thing. That's the globalization of our economy. So let's go into the dosage forms that are available. And up here I have some unique kinds of dispensing units, and I'll try to get into those in a minute. So obviously we can do capsules, liquids, creams and ointments, transdermal gels, ophthalmics, otics, injectables, all different kinds of injectables, nasal irrigation, suppositories, medicated treats, lavages, sprays, drugs for ionophoresis and phonophoresis, powder insufflators. For those of you who don't know what a powder insufflator is, it looks like this little accordion. If you want to come up later and take a look at this. So it's for like when you want to spray powder into an open wound. You get a sterile powder, put it in here, and you can puff it onto the wound. And these are called powder insufflators. We do all kinds of suppositories, both for humans and for animals. There's a unique kind of a suppository, and this is called a rectal rocket. And I know you can't see what it looks like, but if you want to come up, and this obviously is a mimic of what comes out of the molds. But the unique thing about this, typically suppositories are inserted rectally and they disappear. Okay, if you pass gas, it comes out. Okay, and it's only used to treat internal problems. Okay, whether it be rectal fissures or whether it be hemorrhoids. This rectal rocket has a stop on it. Okay, so that when it's inserted, part of it's on the inside and part of it's on the outside. And in addition to that, it has a shaft that in case you pass gas, the gas passes through the shaft. So by passing gas, the suppository is not expelled. So this suppository can be inserted and kept in place for literally hours to apply the medication to the source of the problem. So it's kind of a unique dosage form that is interesting.
Cal, could you explain what iontophoresis is for the class?
I'm sorry?
Could you explain iontophoresis for the class?
Okay, so iontophoresis is a method by which you transport drugs through the surface of the skin. And you do it by actually ionizing them using an electrical current. So they have to be sterile. They're put on the surface of the skin. There's a number of drugs that are available for that. A lot of the steroids, if you have a sprain or strain, rather than take the medication internally or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory in case you have a sprain, they'll actually take the chemical, put it in a sterile solution, put it on the surface of the wound, and apply electrical current so that the drug ionizes and passes through the surface of the skin and goes into the source of where the trouble is. Photophoresis is basically the same thing, but you're using heat to transport it across the surface of the skin. Okay, so those are different kinds of dosage forms, and we do a lot of these ionophoresis and photophoresis drugs for the physical therapy places. So they use those a lot. I don't know if there's anything else. Nasal irrigations, I guess, go without saying. And again, if you have any questions at the end. Now, transdermal, maybe now is a good time to talk about transdermal gels. Transdermal medications have become extremely popular over the last 5-10 years. So it used to be the first drug I think that was used transdermally was a scopolamine patch for motion sickness that they put on a patch behind the ear. Scopolamine was marvelous for that. And then they started coming out with other medications. There's clonidine patches, which are used for high blood pressure in a patch, and it's a patch that goes on the surface of the skin. And then they started doing hormones, female hormones in patches, birth controls in patches. So we've been doing transdermal gels for quite some time. And what that means is you actually take the drug and dissolve it or mix it into a penetrating agent that forces the drug through the surface of the skin. We do it dramatically for animals, and we're doing it for humans also. One of the things a transdermal gel is extremely important is in hospice care. At end of life, a lot of times you have a patient that is not able to hold down food. They're nauseous, they're anxious, their stomachs are upset, and they're really out of it. So there's a transdermal gel that we make called ABHR. And the ABHR is an acronym for the active ingredients that are in it. So there's Ativan, which is lorazepam, Benadryl, which is an antihistamine and a sedative, H is Haldol, okay, and R is Reglan, metoclopramide for intestinal problems. And instead of having, and you can do it in a suppository form also, but it works equally as effectively if you just put a little bit on the carotid. And almost instantly it gets absorbed, and it causes a general feeling of well-being as well as settling the stomach, and not having to worry about whether the medicine's going to come back up if you give it orally, or if it's going to be degrading to the person if you use it as a suppository. We use it tremendously, especially in cats. Cats are very, very difficult to medicate, and because of that, medicate orally. And because of that, a lot of the medications are used in transdermal gels. So in a transdermal gel, all you need on a human or an animal is a hairless area. Did you ever try to find a hairless area on a cat? It's almost impossible. There is one. It's the pinnae. The pinnae is the upper inside of a cat's ear. If you look on the upper inside of a cat's ear, there's a hairless area there. So we formulate the medications into a transdermal gel, and there's a simulation of it that gets dispensed in this syringe. And this syringe has 10 doses in it. There's 1 ml in it. There's each dose is a tenth of an ml. So they very carefully squeeze out a tenth of an ml, transfer it. We give people finger cots to do this. Transfer it to the finger and just gently rub it on the inside of the ear. Most cats love their ears rubbed, and the medicine goes in within moments, 5 to 10 minutes. The drug is entirely absorbed. And the nice thing about these, all of these, whether it be capsules, liquids, transdermals, especially in animals, you can combine multiple drugs in one medication. So we'll get a transdermal gel that has, for a cat that has a cardiomyopathy, that'll have furosemide in it, it'll have diltiazem in it, it'll have multiple drugs in it, and just by putting a tenth of an ml on the inside of the ear, you've medicated your animal. Dogs are a lot easier. They have a lot of hairless areas. The groin of the dog is an ideal place. For those cats that are too hairy, we just recommend shaving a patch on the back of the neck for a site of application. Works equally as well as long as there's no hair. The medications go through the surface of the skin without any problem at all, and it's absolutely amazing. For those skeptics that say, well, how can we show that transdermal gels work? Well, sometimes it's very difficult to prove that transdermal gels work. One of the maladies of cats is a condition called hyperthyroidism, where their thyroid gland is producing too much thyroid. So there's a drug called methimazole that actually slows down the production of the thyroid gland. So that one is easy because you do a blood test, and 30 days later you can test the thyroid levels and you can tell that it's working. For those real skeptics, we say, I want you to come in. I'm going to formulate, I don't know if anybody knows what furosemide is, or Lasix. It's a diuretic. Okay, it's a really neat diuretic in that it works in a certain part of the kidneys, but it really has an action that is measurable in hours. It's a 4-hour action. So we'll put furosemide in a transdermal gel, and we'll have the person come in and we'll rub it on their forearm. And then they have to go home and urinate for the next 4 hours. And you'll see how easily it works. And these drugs are transmitted. We treat all kinds of medical conditions, both human and animal, with these transdermal gels. And whether it be a heart drug, whether it be a Tenolol, it's almost endless as long as the drug can go through the surface of the skin. And most of the penetrants that we use will force them through the surface of the skin. So it's kind of an interesting way to medicate.
Cal, we have about 5 minutes to go.
Really? Oh my goodness, okay. I know I'm wordy and I apologize for that. So USP Chapter 797 requires in your clean room, in your sterile aseptic room, you have to have HEPA filtered air. and what they indicate are different classes. So it's a class 5, which is the cleanest clean room, so that the particle size, it actually filters out bacteria, viruses, everything. There's nothing in it. The prep room has to be a class 7, where most of the things are filtered out. So this is our sterile suite at our pharmacy, at our location. And this is what's called a modular clean room. On the other side of this section, which is where the sterile compounding occurs, there's a gowning area also in what's considered class 7. It's actually class 5, but once you go in there, it becomes class 7 because you're not really clean when you first walk in there. This is a door into the prep room, and I'll show you the prep room in a second. There's another clean room back here that has a barrier isolator in it. So this is the prep room. When anybody goes into the prep room, you have to walk across a tacky mat to take all the residue off of your feet. You have to put on booties, you have to gown up, you have to cover your hair. If you have a beard, you have to cover your beard. You have a face mask, so everything that goes in there. Everything that goes into this prep room is pre-prepared with alcohol. You have to rinse everything off with alcohol before it comes in here. Now this is not the cleanest room, this is a class 7. This is the prep room. This is where everything is weighed out, because you can't weigh into the clean room. So, and I hate to go through this quickly, but this is extremely important. Bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, oral or topical, and I bring that up. There's a lot of pharmacies that do bioidentical hormone, but I will tell you that if they don't have a powder containment hood, they're in violation of OSHA. OSHA is the organization, the federal government, that protects people who are working in environments. So anything that's weighed out in the hormone has to be in here. The hormones we do are basically topical, and I'll try to get into the reasons why we use them. Pain management. We alleviate pain predominantly with topical medications. When you do them topically, you don't interact, you don't go into the stomach. It works faster than most oral medications. There's none of the unwanted side effects. We say it bypasses first pass liver metabolism. So what happens is if you swallow the drug, it doesn't go directly to the body. It first goes into the stomach, it's sort of digested, and then it goes through the liver where part of it's metabolized. Once it gets through there, then it can pass through the blood-brain barrier. When you do them topically, it goes through the surface of the skin into the stratus corneum, gets absorbed into the lymphatic system and the bloodstream without the unwanted side effect. So you can target the site of pain rather than the whole body. So we treat all kinds of pain: inflammatory pain, neuropathic pain, fibromyalgia, muscle pain, myofascial pain, sports injuries, trigeminal, temporal mandibular joint syndrome. So all these things can be treated topically with different kinds of medications, whether it be a steroid, whether it be an anti-inflammatory. What we're trying to do is interrupt the pain transmission. This is Jen, one of our technicians, working on an ointment, pain ointment. Dental, we do medicated lip balms, topical anesthetics, mouth rinses, antifungal lollipops, and I'm going to breeze through these things. We treat a lot of children with autism. A lot of the diets for autistic children can't have any dyes or alcohol or preservatives in them, so we make all those kind of things, and we improve compliance. We can make them flavored. We can make them in oral treats. We compound medications who have celiac disease. Celiac disease is basically a gluten intolerance in the digestive system. So anything that has any kind of corn product or wheat product in it, and most products have some amount in them, tablets and capsules, so we can make a pure drug. So if you need acetaminophen or an antibiotic in a pure form, we can do that. Veterinary, that's my daughter Sharon's cat, Samwise. If anybody has read the news journal, you see a lot of quotes by Samwise, and he loves the medication we make for him. So veterinary, we have dogs and cats, zoo animals, exotic horses, reptile, primates, that runs the gamut. So the reason for veterinary medications, they're flavored. We have novel delivery systems. Like this is what's called a dial-a-dose. So if you need to measure out in a paste, a lot of times in a horse it has to go in a paste in the mouth. So these things just dial the dose and you can do it. We make a flavored treat. And we're going to come up later and take a look at the flavored treats. Ophthalmics and otics for animals, and obviously the treats to treat. And that's what those are. Pediatrics, again, cardiology, gastroenterology, oncology, neurology, mitochondrial defects, and dermatology. So again, a lot of these medications for these conditions are not made for children, and we can start out with the active ingredients and make them appropriately. When I look at gastroenterology, this is, a lot of the times they use proton pump inhibitors. They use Nexium and Prilosec, and so those kind of drugs. But those drugs are very, very susceptible to deterioration in an acid medium. And one of the things that if you're going to be a compounding pharmacy, you have to have a pH meter to make sure that the final product that you have is within the limits, so otherwise the product goes bad in a very short period of time. So in pediatrics, we do flavored liquids, lollipops, transdermals, gummy bears, troches, lozenges. If anybody doesn't know what those are kind of like old formulation. So this is the outside of our building, and you can see it's not much. We opened up in an industrial park because we didn't really need a storefront, and we thought that would be a good way to do it. We started out very slow. We're in our 13th year right now, and we've expanded quite a bit. This is our waiting area. We don't have cash registers. You come in and you come into a waiting area like this. We have chairs to sit and wait. So it's a much more professional kind of a spot. Amber in the back here is working on a computer to get things packaged up for shipping. We do a fair amount of shipping. This is a consultation room. Every patient that comes in gets consulted. If it's a pet, they get consulted on exactly how to use it. If it's human, they get put into this room and we go over exactly how to use the medications. You can see the charge containers. I'm also certified along with two of my pharmacists to give injections. So we give the flu vaccine, we give pneumococcal, we do meningitis, so all the different things. So this is the consultation room where we'll do that. This is to get an idea of the size of our lab. Most pharmacies have a corner of a sink that they do compounding. We have 2,000 square feet that we're able to do compounding. And you can see the powder containment hoods. There's one here, one on the other side, and one in what we call our treat section back over here. So powder containment hoods, if you're dealing with a hazardous medication or chemical, it has to be done under a hood, and it has to be done with gloves on, et cetera, et cetera. So the powder containment hood does not protect the product you're working on. It protects the environment, and it protects the person that's working on the product. So typically you'll see somebody working on it with a hazardous, they'll put on gloves, sleeves, and a mask to make sure they're not exposed. This is Carrie, and this is a simulation. She just finished making some of the medication in a treat form. This one section is dedicated. We don't do anything here but have veterinary treats over here, both for dogs and cats. That's Brenda, Karen again, compounding. On this side here, we do nothing but hormones. So it's dedicated to that. This other side is dedicated to any kind of hazardous chemical. So mortars and pestle, we have them by the hundreds. Beakers and graduates, we have them by the hundreds. It's not usual. Sorry I had to rush through it, but that's it. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to.
Thank you very much. Great presentation.
Any questions? I have a question. Can you talk first? Oh, sorry.
My primary care physician prescribes a medication for me. Do I need to walk down to your building to buy it, or do you ship it somewhere? How does that work? How does he know about the things?
Well, most of those that are requiring specialized medicines know about us. And that includes Johns Hopkins, the University of Pennsylvania. Most of the colleges and universities know about compounding pharmacies and look for pharmacies that do this. Most of those that require compounding know that we exist and know that compounding pharmacy exists. And yes, we do ship. We do ship. We try to limit it to the 4-state area, our surrounding states. We don't want to fill prescriptions for the entire world. We're happy just filling for our patient population. But we do ship all over, certainly downstate Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania.
Well, the next person is coming with a question. Do you have an opinion on this? I don't remember. I think it was a type of vaccine that they were going to use. It was an untried, unapproved vaccine for meningitis. Was that it?
Well, it was not a vaccine. It was a drug that they use in an intraspinal injection, and it was. And is that what you're talking about? The fungal infections that ensued. So there was this quote compounding pharmacy in Massachusetts that was really not a compounding pharmacy. All they did in that pharmacy was basically manufacture injectables to be sent in room. They had a boiler that was leaking and a fungus that had never before been found in humans that was being injected into the spines. 70 people died across the country. Over 700 have become permanently disabled because of this fungal infection. We don't like to call it a compounding pharmacy. They were different than anybody else, and they're not alone. There are other
organized process to make sure that the key learnings from the veterinary side does get transmitted to the other part.
Good, that's a good question, and as a matter of fact, I belong to a physician's organization. I'm the only non-physician in the organization, and we had actually 2 oncologists there, and I mentioned that piroxicam was extremely effective in bladder cancer. The problem is, piroxicam has been on the market for years and years and years. No drug manufacturer is going to go do the studies to get it approved for bladder cancer. Will there be an oncologist that say, hey, maybe this will work, and try it in a protocol utilizing it? I don't think that that'll be the case because everybody's afraid of some kind of litigation. Would it be a good idea? My God, it's so effective in bladder cancer in dogs that I can't imagine not using it. It's not an innocuous drug, but the side effect profile is relatively low. And I asked the oncologist, why they don't try it. He said, well, there's no studies that show that it worked. Well, there are some drugs, for instance, glucosamine and chondroitin. That was a veterinary drug before it became very prevalent in people who have knee pain and arthritic pain. So there have been incidences of a veterinary drug that has been carried over to the human side. I wish there was more of them. And it's interesting that veterinarians are not afraid for off-label use to try things. You're dealing with an animal that has a relatively short lifespan compared to the human. So what would normally be a 70-year lifespan becomes a 10-year lifespan in a dog and a 15-year lifespan in a cat. So things can progress much more quickly. And you can see the results of these medications much more quickly and easily.
Thank you for your talk. Quite interesting. Here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Question about the payment. Does Group D Medicare payment apply equally to compounded drugs as well as retail pharmaceutical drugs?
So bear in mind that Medicare Part D, which is the prescription benefit of the Medicare part, is private insurance. It is not the federal government, it's private insurance. Each one is different. We find that our Medicare patients, we don't accept direct reimbursement from the insurance industry. Everybody pays us cash, submits a form to their insurance company for reimbursement. We feel, simply by hearsay, that about 80% get reimbursed, at least in part, minus, of course, their deductible and or copay. So most of the organizations do cover compounds, simply because the compounded medications are dramatically cheaper than the regular manufactured drugs. So the answer is, hopefully they will get it. It's dependent on the policy, because those are all private insurance companies. By the way, excuse me, let me reiterate that. Now, Medicaid, which is a federal state program, okay, covers all compounds. Okay, so if you're on Medicaid, all those drugs are covered. All the compounds are covered.
Who are the labs, or what type of labs do you send your products out to be checked by?
There are FDA-regulated laboratories that have to follow procedures the same way that the drug manufacturers send them out. A lot of the drug manufacturers have in-house facilities for testing, but we like to use independent testing to make sure it's correct. So there are Analytical Research Lab in Houston, Texas. There's Eagle Analytical in Oklahoma. There's a number of laboratories across the country that have facilities set up for potency and stability. Now, I'll tell you that when you send it out for potency, they have to use USP standards to determine that it's potent. To buy a USP standard, it costs the lab $750 for that monograph in order to be able to test it. So it's not a cheap thing to do. Once they get the monograph, they can reuse it. But in order, if you're going to be testing a new drug, it adds $750 to the cost of the testing. So, but we use independent laboratories that are FDA approved for doing these kind of studies, whether it be identification of the product, potency of the product to make sure it's close to 100%, and stability and endotoxin.
Some years ago now, in fact, so many years ago, I don't remember the name of the medication, not the medication, it was a drug that was generic. It was easily available, and you put on your skin with anything dissolved in it, and that would be immediately absorbed into the bloodstream. I don't remember the name of it, but do you use that in any of your transdermals?
We do. It's called dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO.
That's it.
And that is one that actually came from animals. So horse trainers used to use it all the time. They would have a horse that would come up lame, and they would rub it on the joint that was lame. And what they found, as soon as they put it on their skin, within 5 seconds they could taste it. That's how quickly it got into the system, and it was absolutely amazing. The downside is that it can cause kidney problems. They were using a reagent grade or industrial grade DMSO. It's just an industrial solvent, a great solvent. And yes, we do use it in certain cases. We use a USB grade DMSO. We use it in some of the medications to transfer the medication across the skin. We actually use it in ophthalmology sometimes for cataracts. We do use it for a number of different things. So, and I don't know if anybody knows what a onychomycosis is. It's a fungus underneath the nail bed. Very, very difficult to hit. Okay, but if you use DMSO to get through the surface of the nail, you can get the medicines through the surface to treat the onychomycosis.
Can I go one last question? Many of your more popular drugs come in multiple dosages, especially those for cholesterol and heart disease. From a patient's point of view, financially and medically, what would be the pros and cons of taking, let us say, a 20 milligram pill, splitting it, and where a 10 milligram dosage is recommended?
Yeah, you can certainly split pills and do those kind of things, and there's nothing wrong with that. Economically, I can buy a drug much cheaper than, and if it's a generic drug, it's a different story. They're buying the chemicals the same place I am and putting them into the same form that the brand is. If it's a branded drug, you have some drugs that are $80 a pill. Okay, well, $80 a pill may cost me 8 cents for the ingredients. So I'm not going to charge $80 for that, although it can't be the same strength. Okay, so there can be an economic incentive. If, for instance, if it's a 20 milligram pill, but you need 17.5 milligrams, there's no way for you to do that. I can do it. I can make any strength that you want down to a 1/10 of a milligram or a 100th of a milligram. I mean, I can make it anything at all. And again, in veterinary medicine, we get that all the time. You know, you can have, like for instance, we do diazepam suppositories, Valium suppositories for seizures in dogs. It's always milligram now. The top dose in humans is 10 milligrams. We'll get a prescription for a diazepam suppository, 90 milligrams. It's dependent on the size of the animal. Can you do that with a commercial product? No. So there's nothing wrong with using either a tablet and a half or 2 tablets or whatever if it's available and it's the correct dosage for you. But again, that's off-label. That becomes off-label because the FDA says it's only available in those 3 strengths. You better take it or leave it. If you're not doing it that way, then it's no longer FDA approved. It's what's known as off-label usage. And doctors can do that. I mean, doctors can write for anything off-label. They're not limited to what the FDA says it's used for. Doctors can prescribe any drug for any purpose that they deem it appropriate, and they have that ability to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Freedman. I think this is a great presentation to end the semester on. And one other thing I would like to say, Cal, and that is, I wish I would have seen a presentation like this when I was still in practice. I might have done a few things differently. Thank you again.
You want that rock?